Welcome back, and thank you for being here. Today we have a new story from Nora Calloway. It is called The Beginner. Find your most comfortable place, take a breath, and let us begin. Act 1. The Sign. The flyer was taped to the inside of the library window, which meant you had to be walking out rather than walking in to notice it, and Diane almost did not notice it because she was thinking about something else, the way she had been thinking about something else for most of the past year, a low, continuous hum of thought that was not about anything specific and yet managed to occupy most of the available space. She stopped on the library steps and turned back and read the flyer through the glass. Community woodworking shop. Beginner classes forming now. All skill levels welcome. No experience necessary. She stood on the steps in the October wind and read it twice. She had no particular interest in woodworking. She had never thought about woodworking. The word beginner was the thing that stopped her, or rather the phrase no experience necessary, which she read and then read again and felt something shift slightly in her chest, some small movement of a thing that had been sitting in one position for too long. She was 64 years old. She had retired 8 months ago from a job she had been good at and had found, upon leaving it, that being good at something for a long time creates a kind of structure that you do not notice until it is gone. She was not unhappy. She filled her days adequately, the garden, the grandchildren on Thursdays, the book club that met on the second Tuesday of each month, the long walks she took alone in the mornings before the town came fully awake. She was not unhappy, but she was not entirely something else either, and she could not find the word for what she was not entirely, which was itself a problem because Diane Collier had spent 40 years working with words and was accustomed to finding them. She went back inside and wrote down the number from the flyer. She sat on the idea for 4 days. She mentioned it to no one, which was deliberate. She had learned over the years that mentioning an idea to other people before it had properly formed was a reliable way of talking yourself out of it, because other people, even the well-meaning ones, had a way of introducing practical objections that the idea had not yet developed enough to withstand. She let it develop. On the fourth day she called the number. A man answered. He sounded older, unhurried, with the particular manner of someone who does what he does because he genuinely wants to, and has long since stopped worrying about whether that is enough justification. His name was Walt. He told her the class met on Wednesday evenings and Saturday mornings, that they worked on real projects rather than practice exercises, that by the end of the session, most beginners had made something they could bring home, and that the only thing she needed to bring was clothes. She did not mind getting sawdust on. She said, "What kind of something?" He said, "Last session most folks made a small shelf. One woman made a step stool, a man made a box for his fishing tackle. It depends on what you want." She said, "What if I do not know what I want yet?" He said, "That is fine too. Most people figure it out once they start working with the wood." She signed up for the Wednesday evening class. She did not tell her daughter until the following Monday, by which time the idea had grown solid enough to survive the practical objections, of which there were several. Her daughter Patricia thought it was wonderful and also slightly peculiar, which was the response Diane had expected and which she accepted without argument. Her friend Gail said, "Woodworking, and then?" "Well, good for you," in a tone that suggested she found it eccentric but harmless. Her son-in-law offered to drive her, which she declined because she was 64, not 90, which she did not say out loud but thought clearly. She drove herself on the first Wednesday evening. The shop was in a low building behind the community center, a converted space that smelled immediately and powerfully of cut wood and oil and something underneath both of those things. A clean, dry smell that she could not identify, but that she found unexpectedly pleasant. Work benches ran the length of the room in two rows. Tools hung on pegboards along the walls, outlined in marker the way tools in serious shops always are, each one with its shadow shape beneath it, so you know at a glance what is missing. The lighting was bright and practical and made the wood on the benches glow a warm amber. There were 8 other people in the class. They ranged in age from perhaps 30 to what she estimated was late 70s, and they had in common the same slightly uncertain quality that beginners have before they begin, the held back quality of people who are not yet sure what they are getting into. Walt was shorter than his voice had suggested, and wore a canvas apron with pockets that had clearly been used for a very long time. He welcomed them without formality and without making anything of the welcome, and then he told them they were going to start by learning to feel the wood before they did anything else to it. He put a piece of pine on each work bench, and he said, "Put your hands on it. Just look at it and put your hands on it and tell me what you notice." Diane put her hands on the pine. She noticed that it was smoother than she expected along the grain and slightly rough against it. She noticed that it was lighter than it looked. She noticed that the grain ran in a pattern that was not random but not regular either, something in between, the record of years of growth made visible in the surface of the cut. Walt went around the room and asked what people noticed. The answers were different from each other in ways that surprised Diane, who had assumed wood was wood and that noticing it was noticing it. But the man beside her felt the weight first, and the woman across the bench noticed the smell, and someone near the window talked about the color, which he said was not one color but several, and Walt listened to all of it and said, "Good, that is how you start." Diane drove home that night with sawdust on her jacket that she had not acquired by doing anything, only by being in the room where doing was happening, and she sat in her car in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside and thought about the pine under her hands and the smell of the shop and the specific quality of Walt's attention, which had been the same for every person regardless of what they said. The quality of someone to whom the noticing itself is the interesting thing. She thought, "I am going back on Saturday." She went back on Saturday. Act 2, the work. By the fourth week, she had decided what she wanted to make. This had taken longer than it took most people in the class, which Walt had noted without judgment, saying only that some people knew right away, and some people needed to work with the material for a while before the material told them what it wanted to be. Diane had found this formulation slightly mystical and had not entirely believed it, and then on the fourth Wednesday she had been standing at her bench sanding a practice piece, her hands moving along the grain in the long strokes Walt had shown them, and she had thought, a table, a small table, the kind you put beside a chair, not a complicated table, a beginner's table with 4 legs and a top, and the particular honest simplicity of something made to hold a cup of tea and a book and nothing more. But hers, made by her hands in this room out of this wood. She told Walt at the end of the session. He said, "Good choice. We will start on the legs Wednesday." The legs were harder than she expected. Everything in woodworking was harder than she expected, which she had understood intellectually from the beginning, but was still surprised by each time it was demonstrated in practice. The precision required was a different kind of precision from anything she had worked with before. 40 years in publishing had taught her precision of a particular kind, the precision of language, of fact, of structure and argument, and the careful placing of words. This was a different precision entirely, physical and unforgiving, where a measurement that was almost right produced a result that was visibly, undeniably wrong. She made mistakes. This was also harder than she expected. Not the making of the mistakes, but the sitting with them, the understanding that the mistake was now in the wood, and the wood was not going to change its mind. Walt had a phrase he used when people made mistakes, which was, "Now you know." He said it without irony and without consolation, just as information, a plain acknowledgment that the mistake had taught something that instruction alone could not. Diane found this oddly comforting. Now you know. Yes, that is exactly what has happened. She knew now. She thought about her career, the 40 years of it, and how rarely she had been a beginner in that time. She had been a beginner at 22, arriving at the publishing house knowing very little, making mistakes that she remembered still with the specific clarity that embarrassing mistakes retain across decades. Then she had become competent, and then good, and then very good, and the mistakes had become smaller and less frequent, and the learning had become a different kind of learning, the refinement of things already known, rather than the acquisition of things entirely new. She had not realized how much she had missed the other kind. There was something in being genuinely, completely new to something. She could not quite name it, but she felt it on the Wednesday evenings and the Saturday mornings with great consistency. It was a quality of presence, of being entirely in the room, because the room required all of her, because there was no part of her that could go elsewhere while her hands worked, because her hands needed the rest of her right there paying attention. She had not felt that in some time. She mentioned this to the woman who worked at the bench beside her, whose name was Sandra, and who was making a jewelry box with a level of ambition that Diane found impressive and slightly alarming. Sandra said, "I know exactly what you mean. I retired from nursing 2 years ago, and I have been looking for this ever since without knowing what this was." Diane said, "What did you try before this?" Sandra listed watercolor painting, which she had enjoyed, but which had not given her the physical quality she was looking for, a pottery class, which she had loved until the studio closed, knitting, which her hands did not cooperate with, gardening, which was good, but not quite contained enough, not enough of the sense of a problem with a specific solution. Diane said, "This has that, the specific solution quality." Sandra said, "That is exactly it. There is a right way to do each thing. You can be wrong and then less wrong and then right. That is very satisfying when you have spent a long time in professions where right and wrong are more complicated." Diane thought about this for the rest of that session and on the drive home and on and off for the following week. She thought about what it meant to want a problem with a specific solution. She had not known she wanted that. She had thought what she was missing was purpose or usefulness or the simple structure of having somewhere to be. Those things were part of it. But this was the deeper thing, the thing beneath the other things, the desire to be completely present in a task that required her whole attention and rewarded it with something visible and real. She was making a table. The table would exist. She would put it beside the chair in her living room, and she would rest her tea on it and her book, and it would hold them reliably because she had made it to hold them, because she had measured and cut and joined and sanded with her own hands and her own judgment and her own capacity to be wrong, and then less wrong, and then right. The weeks moved with a quality she had not experienced in some time, not quickly. She did not want them to go quickly. They moved the way weeks move when each one contains something you are working toward, a middle distance purpose that makes the days between feel different, purposeful in the borrowed light of the thing you are building. She finished the legs on a Saturday in November, four of them, not identical but close enough, the slight variation between them a record of her learning across the weeks, the last one more precisely made than the first. Walt looked at them and said, "Now you know how to make a leg." She said, "Now I know." He said, "The top is next." Act 3, The Table. She finished the table on a Wednesday evening in early December. She did not know, going in that evening, that she would finish it. She had thought there was still sanding to do, the final passes that brought the surface to the smoothness Walt had described at the beginning as the goal, the surface that felt like something that has been attended to and is now ready. She had done what she thought was enough sanding the previous Saturday, and Walt had run his hand across the top and said, "Almost." She had sanded more. She ran her hand across the top on Wednesday evening and thought, "Yes, that is it." Walt came and ran his hand across it. He nodded once. He said, "That is it." She stood back and looked at the table. It was small, as intended. The top was 18 inches square and the legs were 26 inches tall, which was the height she had measured against the chair in her living room, kneeling on the floor with a tape measure on a Sunday afternoon. The wood was cherry, which she had chosen in the sixth week when Walt had showed them the available options, and she had run her hand across the cherry sample and felt the particular warmth of it, the way it seemed to hold the light differently from the other options, and known without deliberating that this was the one. The table was not perfect. She knew this and could see it if she looked closely. The slight unevenness in one joint, the place near one leg where the grain had not behaved as she had intended, and she had made a decision about it that was correct but left a trace. Walt had told her that furniture made by hand always carries these traces, and that this was not a flaw, but a record, the evidence of the specific person who made it and the specific process of making. She believed him. She was glad of the traces. She carried the table out to her car herself, which required some maneuvering and the assistance of Sandra, who held the shop door open and said, "Look at that." Diane set it in the back of the car and looked at it and said, "Yes." Sandra said, "Will you come back for the next session?" Diane said, "Yes, I am going to make something harder." Sandra said, "What?" Diane said, "I don't know yet. I am going to let Walt tell me what comes after a table." Sandra laughed. She said, "Good answer." Diane drove home through the December night with the cherry table in the back of her car and the shop smell still in her clothes and the particular feeling she had come to associate with Wednesday evenings, which was the feeling of a person who has done something real with her hands and is now driving home from it, tired in the way you are tired after physical work that was also mental work, all of you having been required, and all of you having shown up. She carried the table inside and set it beside the chair in the living room. She went to the kitchen and made tea and brought it back and set it on the table. She sat in the chair and looked at the table with the cup of tea on it, and she thought about the flyer in the library window, and the word beginner, and the phone call to Walt, and the first Wednesday evening with the pine under her hands, and the smell of the shop, and Sandra beside her, working on the jewelry box, and all the Wednesday evenings and Saturday mornings between then and now, all the mistakes and the corrections, and the growing knowledge of how Wood behaved, and how she needed to adjust herself to it rather than forcing it to adjust to her. She thought about Walt saying, "Now you know." She thought about how many times she had heard that in the past 10 weeks, and how true it was each time, how the knowing had accumulated quietly, without her noticing it accumulating, the way a skill builds before you can see that it has built. She thought about her daughter Patricia, who had a house full of furniture bought from the stores, good furniture, well made, but bought rather than built. She thought, "I could make her something. Not yet, not until I am better, but eventually." She thought about what eventually felt like from where she was sitting. It felt possible. It felt like a direction she was already moving in, had been moving in since the October afternoon when she had stood on the library steps and read the word beginner and felt something shift. She picked up her tea. The table held it without difficulty, which was the whole point, which was what a table was for, but she had made this one herself, and it was holding her tea in her living room, and outside the December night was doing what December nights do, and inside the lamp was on, and the chair was comfortable, and the cherry wood of the table was warm in the lamplight, the grain of it visible, the record of years of growth, and the record of her hands both present in the surface of it. She thought about the year past, the 8 months of retirement that had felt at times like a country she did not have a map for. She had been looking for the map in the wrong places. The map was not in the garden, or the book club, or the long morning walks, though all of those were good things, real things, things she would keep. The map was in the shop on Wednesday evenings. The map was in the smell of cut wood, and the feel of the grain, and the particular satisfaction of a problem with a specific solution, and a person willing to be wrong about it until she was right. She thought, "I am a beginner." She thought, "I am going to keep being one." Not a beginner at woodworking, or not only that, a beginner at the other things too, the things that required all of her and gave her back something she could hold in her hands and know was real. She did not know yet what all those things were. She was looking forward to finding out. She finished her tea. She set the cup down on the table she had made. Outside the December night settled into itself, and inside the lamp made its small, warm world, and Diane Collier, 64 years old, newly retired, recently a beginner, sat in her chair and felt, for the first time in a long time, exactly like herself. End of novel.